Hello, and welcome everyone to the Google Zeitgeist session. As David said, Zeitgeist is our thought leadership event, where we invite terribly clever people come together from media and technology and arts and circus and industry and politics, and they talk about important things. And David spoke there, so we thought we would return the favor this year by curating a session here at Wired 2014. Now, we have 4 more speakers after me, so I'm going to kick us off without further ado. So I work at Google X, which is the team at Google that works on things like this: self-driving cars, self-flying delivery vehicles, smart glasses, smart contact lenses, energy kites, and internet from balloons. Now, you might be wondering, this is a really random collection of things. Is there anything that connects this? And actually, there's nothing that connects these projects. The only thing that connects them is that they're all about solving very large problems. So that's what my talk is about. I'm going to talk about problems, and by the end of it, I want you to all love problems, okay? So Google X's mission is about moonshots, and that means we find and we solve very large problems via radical technology solutions. Now, let's take an example, self-driving cars. There's many problems with road transportation. One of them is traffic. I'd forgotten how bad the traffic is in London, but it took me roughly the same time to get across London in a cab yesterday as it did to fly here from San Francisco, right? But the biggest problem with road transportation is safety. 1.3 million people each year die on the road, and almost all of those accidents are caused by driver error. So the radical solution is, what if you take the driver out of the car? This was science fiction for most of the 20th century. Now, there's these beautiful pictures from the 50s of people playing dominoes in the back of their car. But now, with recent advances in computer vision, processing power, and mapping, it's actually within our grasp. So we will have a fully autonomous car before my children have to pass their driving test. Now, I'm very pleased about this because I did my driving test here in London, age 31, and I passed on the 3rd attempt, finally. And I'm still a terrible driver, as my husband is very fond of pointing out. So wouldn't it be amazing if my kids never have to take their test? The self-driving car is never distracted. It's never texting, it's never doing its makeup, it's never having an argument with the co-pilot, and it's never drunk. And when the kids say, "Are we there yet?" it will just show them a map. So there are many problems in the world like this that are worth solving. Problems around communication, hunger, climate change, and health. So let's look at some statistics. 2/3 of the world's population does not yet have internet access. Now, this stat I came across about 2 years ago when I started working on Project Loon, which is our Internet from Balloons project. And I found it completely astonishing because all of us are so used to being connected all the time. Now, you might argue, you can live without internet. But what about these? 11% of the world doesn't have access to clean water. 1 in 9 people still go hungry. And that's particularly disgraceful because everyone agrees there is enough food in the world, but we feed it to animals, we make biofuels from it, it's wasted, or it's just in the wrong place. 90% of the world's energy still comes from fossil fuels, so we clearly have a long way to go on climate change. And 15 million people each year have a stroke, and 6 million of those die. Now, this last statistic is very personal for me because my father just had a stroke. It was mild, he didn't die, but now he can barely talk. And to see my brilliant, articulate father reduced to the vocabulary of a toddler is truly heartbreaking. And of course, I and the whole family are thinking, is he going to have another one? That will be worse. You're probably familiar with all of these statistics, and you can add your own problems to the list, right? Some of these problems we work on at Google, like wind energy or like internet access. Some we don't, like water or food. And that's not because we don't think they're not important, but because we haven't found a breakthrough technology that we think we can apply to the problem. But clearly somebody needs to work on these problems, right? Otherwise mankind is in trouble. So who will? Many of you in the audience probably work with startups or in startups. So startups are a great group to potentially address this. I'm a startup mentor, and I'm also an angel investor. And too many times when I talk to founders in the early stages, they're picking a problem that they think they can solve rather than a problem that's worth solving. That must be the reason we have so many messaging and photo apps, right? There's no other. And I'm not saying those aren't useful. We all use them every day. And in fact, my mother loves WhatsApp. So when my father was in hospital, we got sort of up-to-the-minute updates on his condition, how he was doing, when he was going into the operating theater, etc. To my brothers and I, even though we were in San Francisco and London and Berlin and everywhere. We even got this picture that I wish he hadn't shared. My brother says, "Was ist das? What is it?" And my other brother says, "It's the plaque from Dad's artery." So this is the blob they took out of my dad's artery. And if that's not enough to put you off your next bacon sandwich, I don't know what is. So clearly these apps are useful, right? And it's really lovely. For instance, my father uses Hangouts a lot. So he sings to his grandchildren over Hangouts. Because weirdly, he can still sing, although he can't talk. And that's great. But what I really, really want is a device that I can put on his wrist that will tell him before he has another stroke. Will that take longer to build than the next mobile app? Yes, it will. But it'll be worth it. But of course, somebody has to fund that, right? That's a crazy project. So those of you in the audience who are VCs or angels, please fund some of these crazy projects. Don't just fund the next mobile app, however kind of sexy and cool it might be. So by now, I hope you agree with me that there are many large problems that are worth addressing. So how can we get more people to work on problems that matter? Well, there's a few things that hold us back from this, right? One's kind of obvious. Large problems are daunting. They're scary. They're hard. We don't like working on hard things. It's risky, and it's expensive. But the second one, I think, is less obvious, and that is we don't spend enough time with the problem up front. And we reward people for problem solving, not for problem stating. So let's talk a little bit about that second part. How many of you love problems? Can I have a show of hands? Wow, this is a wired audience. You guys obviously all love problems. Well, the truth is most people don't love problems, right? Like traffic and work problems and sleep problems and problem children. They're things that we'd rather not have in our lives. So what we do is we run away from them as quickly as possible, as if they were monsters. And what I want to encourage you and everyone else that you talk to do is to not run away from them. I want you to run towards the problems, like Max in Where the Wild Things Are. He runs towards the monsters, and he eventually becomes their king. This was one of my favorite books when I was growing up. If you've not read it, go and order it in the next break. So first of all, we need to spend some time understanding the problem correctly. So let's take Project Loon as an example. Say you want to bring the internet to a village in Africa. You need three things. You need devices that are cheap enough so people can afford them. You need electricity to power the devices. And then you need the connectivity. So when the Loon team looked at this problem space, thinking about which part of the problem they should solve, they picked connectivity, because they thought that was one of the hardest ones that nobody was having a go at. And that's very true, because other people have brought down the cost of smartphones, they've brought down the cost of solar panels. But connectivity in Africa and other remote places is still disgracefully expensive. So if you go back to your startups, right, they often don't spend enough time in that early stage. They're impatient, I get that, right? Like founders want to get on with building stuff and they might run out of money as well, which would be bad. But they also don't spend enough time with the people who have the problem to understand, whether they can solve it. So at Google X, we've actually pivoted several projects completely after we did some user research. And I'll give you one example, which is kind of the biggest one. So Project Wing is about self-flying delivery vehicles, also known as drones. And the first use case that we came up with was to deliver defibrillators to people after they had a heart attack. So the idea was you ring 999, and the drone shows up within 90 seconds and brings you a defibrillator. And we were really excited about this because it's saving lives, which is a good thing, right? And it's also a very hard technology problem to get something to you that quickly. But it turned out that it wasn't the right problem. Because when our research team started talking to doctors and first responders, and then they also did some very hands-on experiments on dummies. So this is an innocent bystander who's trying to apply the defibrillator. And it turns out that even if there is a bystander, which by the way isn't the case in many heart attacks, even if there is one, it takes the person several minutes to figure out how to work the damn thing. And if you imagine, this is often an elderly woman who's just seen her husband drop down on the floor, she's not going to be reading the instruction manual. So we realized that this was not the right problem to work on, and we gave up on that idea. And in fact, someone in the team said, what are we doing, like delivering defibrillators? Really what you need is like a device that tells you before you have the heart attack, right? Which is still science fiction, just like my father's stroke device. But hopefully it won't be by the time, our children get old. So this problem kind of solving, stating process can be very painful. In fact, I used to think of it like an onion, right? You peel the layer of the onion, you cry, you peel another layer of the onion, you cry again, and it kind of is a horrible process. But I want you to think of it instead as a problem ladder, which is a much better image. So climbing the ladder is painful and hard, but once you get to the top, you're rewarded with this amazing view. You understand the space of your problem much, much better. And then, to paraphrase Wittgenstein, you can kick the ladder away. Or, as another philosopher, the American John Dewey said, a problem well put is a problem half solved. Okay, so now let's talk about the second part, that large problems are daunting, right? It's true that tackling large problems require a really weird mixture of audacity, like believing in the impossible, and humility, where you acknowledge that you're not going to be done anytime soon, and you also can't do it by yourself. We have a lot of very ambitious thinkers and crazy people at X, but even we're not foolish enough to try and solve these problems by ourselves. So in fact, we work with partners on almost all of our projects. Academic labs who help with the research, manufacturing partners, and also go-to-market partners. So on Project Loon, we worked with people who know how to make balloons. And we're also working with telco to get their users and their handsets connected to our balloons. The smart contact lens is another example where we're partnering with Novartis because they know how to make contact lenses and they know how to bring medical devices to market. So you don't really have to go it alone. But the second point about this sort of large problems being daunting is a sort of somewhat counterintuitive thought that I want to finish on, that daunting can actually be very motivating. So consider this scenario. About 2 years ago, our self-driving car team asked a bunch of Google employees that were nothing to do with the team to use one of our prototype vehicles for their daily commute. So they all got a car that was outfitted with the self-driving technology and were asked to drive it back and forth to Mountain View, California. Now, at that point, the technology wasn't good enough to do anything except the motorway. So the testers had to drive manually to the motorway, and then they switched into self-driving mode. And our team was feeling pretty good about themselves. They'd made great progress. They thought they'd solved the hardest part of the problem, which is the motorway, because that's the bit that users most complain about, because it's boring, stop-and-go traffic, etc. But it couldn't have been further from the truth. Because what we learned were two things. One, people thought it sucked that they had to drive themselves to the motorway. They actually wanted the car to drive the whole way. And secondly, as soon as the car was in self-driving mode, the user stopped paying attention. So we realized it was actually safer to have a fully autonomous car that would be able to handle all situations. At that point, we stopped the experiment. And the team now had a stark choice. Do we keep going on the easier path, which would have been to build a motorway driver assist product that we probably could have built and sold in much more quickly? Or do we keep going and build a fully autonomous car? Now ask yourself, which one of those would you rather work on? Well, our team decided to go for the fully autonomous car. And here is a picture of our first prototype. It has no steering wheels. It has no brake pedals. It just has an on-off button. And the idea is that that's what takes you from A to B. Now, it's kind of cute, but it's also clearly not done, right? If you compare it to the real cars out there, it looks kind of, funny. So transforming mobility in such a radical way is a really daunting goal. But it also is a very inspiring goal that gets the team to keep going in a way that a smaller goal just wouldn't. And the other thing about it is that it's really inspiring because it gets other people thinking, well, if they can do the impossible, what could we do? So that excitement is really infectious. So next time you think about how you want to spend your next month or your next year or your next 5 years, I hope that you'll spend it on a problem that's worth solving. Thank you.